Alrighty, alrighty now.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to the Easton Book Festival at Lafayette College for this afternoon's presentation of Melba Tolliver, the accidental anchorwoman, interviewing David Graham, who is the author of The Project, how Project 2025 is reshaping America. And I'm going to turn things over. I'm Andy from Easton Book Festival. I'm going to turn things over to Melba Tolliver.
Thank you, Andy. Let's give a real round of applause to Andy because Andy, thank you all for being here. Some of the faces are very familiar because you have been just passionate supporters of our reading every Thursday of Project 2025. So you know the background, you know that 3 weeks into reading, Peter and I said, look, there's a wonderful book out that we should read before we continue with this document. And the book is The Project. And the project author is David A. Graham, who is in Durham. And he's been very patient waiting while we get these technical issues straightened out. So let me say that David, it had been my idea that I would conduct this conversation in 3 parts. The first part would be you talking about your career in journalism. A second part about the work behind the scenes and out front with the Project 2025. And then the third part might be just a free-for-all, or we could also find out where you're headed with this, I don't know what to call it, the whole Project 2025, now and on out. And so here we go. Well, I'll save that. When did you realize that you were a journalist?
And I think I realized I had always had interest in journalism. I think the thing that a couple things grabbed me in retrospect. One of my earliest memories is listening to the first Gulf War coverage on NPR while my mom cooked, and just being taken with the idea of the news and wanting to know everything about it. And then later I read a memoir by Russell Baker, longtime New York Times columnist. He described getting into journalism and his early time in journalism, and it just sounded like so much fun. Like sort of a joke that someone was going to pay you to go around and talk to interesting people and find out about things, and all you had to do in return was write about it. And so when I got to college, I went to work for the college paper and went up in the first week of school and asked for an assignment, and I basically barely left for the rest of my 4 years on campus. And I think it became clear to me that it was something that I loved doing and would do as long as I could get away with it.
And you're getting away with it very successfully so far. So you've been mainly in print journalism, Newsweek, other newspapers. So did you find yourself being really comfortable right from the get-go?
It's interesting. I think, writing is something, it's always something that I've enjoyed, and that has been, even when I didn't feel like I was good at other things, I knew I could write better than those things. When I started as a professional, I thought I would do what I understood to be sort of the path, which was you started a small local paper, you move up to a somewhat larger paper, you get to a major metro, and then if you're lucky, you get to the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you stay there, or you graduate to a magazine, whatever it is. And I think that system was kind of collapsing as I was getting into journalism. And so I sort of stumbled through dumb luck and good connections into mostly, I spent most of my career writing for the web, mostly for the websites of old line print publications, which is an interesting place. It's a sort of a hybrid of the old school approach, but also something new on the internet. And also although Newsweek was a weekly and the Atlantic a monthly, working online gives you some of the kind of higher paced newspaper adrenaline, which is something I've always liked. But I feel like it's been kind of a mixture of learning opportunities and just falling into the right place at the right time in many cases.
Yeah, well, that always works, being at the right place at the right, at the right time. Say just a bit more about these times where we are now, where it seems for an old person like me, it seems like my head just almost blows up when I see all the podcasts, the platforms, the just everything and everything, all hours of the day and night, and who's who and what's what. Are people journalists? Are they hosts? Are they
Influencers.
what do you have to say about that that can ease somebody like me?
Well, I mean, I think this will maybe do some ease and some dis-ease. I think it cuts two ways. On the one hand, there is, I think we are in a situation of too much information or too much alleged information, or a lot of data coming at us, not all of it good information, and not all of it screened or filtered in a way that's useful. And I think that's really overwhelming. Uh, Gatekeepers have a bad name, but I think we're seeing some of the issues with not having gatekeepers. And it translates into lowered trust in the media and people not knowing where to get news and people being very siloed in their news consumption. People, consuming a lot of misinformation and disinformation. So I think those things are really troubling. I will say this, no matter the platform, I think there is a desire for people to present information that is true and that is helpful. People have to be able to communicate clearly. They have to be able to report things clearly. And there is still clearly, I think there are people who want that. I think there is an audience for that. I think there is a market for that. I think there's a business model that works for that. And so my hope is that regardless of where it is, even whether it's on TikTok or in a dead tree edition, as we call it, that that desire for good information remains.
Mhm. Now, what is your definition of news?
Ooh, uh, I mean, it's a tricky question. And I think it's a tricky question on a couple levels. I think there's like a question of what um there's so many little stories, and particularly in this administration, you get things going left and right, and you have to pick the things that are most important. But I also think you have to present them in a way that is useful, not simply
Is what
passing
that
things
you have to
along.
say that again, repeat
You
that?
have to present them in a way that's useful. It can't
Yes.
just be passing them along. It has to be, giving them a context and framing them for people. And I've always been, I feel like I've been lucky to work at for many years now at the Atlantic, a place where we don't feel obligated to cover everything. But we do feel like, and we feel like we have an opportunity to kind of frame it for people or give people good context.
Well, speaking of framing, this is a little off, but George Lakoff.
Melba, his camera's up there.
Oh, okay. George Lakoff, in this book, Don't Think of an Elephant. Know Your Values and Frame the Debate. This book is years and years old. It was written because Lakoff, a linguist, was saying that people who had opponents were actually using the narrative and the language of their opponents. When you say don't think of an elephant, people think of an elephant. If you are repeating using the same narrative as the people whose values you oppose, you are further ingraining their message. And you're thinking about that? How do we sort it out that when we're talking to relatives, friends, colleagues, or so on, that we are not, as we're speaking, actually reframing and embedding the language of the people whose values we oppose?
I think that's a really important question and a really tricky one. And I think there's an impulse often, which I share, to try to, want to meet people where they are. And so I think it's important to understand the views of people with whom we disagree and to take that into account. But it's easy to slip from that into adopting their framing. Um, and I'm not sure I have a clear system for that. beyond to say that it's something that I try to think about all the time, to always have on my mind whether I am adopting, a questionable framework, and to just be sort of um, in the moment, trying to be aware of what I'm doing.
Okay. One of your enterprises right now is the daily newsletter. How did that come about?
Well, it's interesting. This is an example of how mediums have changed. A few years ago, it feels like everyone in journalism started producing newsletters, and some of those are independent writers on places like Substack. They're also, I mean, I think about somebody like Heather Cox Richardson, who has an incredibly huge audience there. We have publications doing it, and the Atlantic started one as a way to push our stories out to people, to get it in their inbox, and also to sort of create a bit of a dialogue with them, and have a kind of direct relationship, where we come to your inbox instead of you having to come to us. And it's a little bit of it connects to, it's like having a magazine sent to you. And so I am the, I guess, third lead writer on this. I've taken it up from a couple colleagues who did time on it, and it's been a really interesting discipline. I've started doing this in February, and so it's a way of thinking about what's the most important story, or one of the most important stories today, that that I can give readers something fresh on, and I can frame in a way that's helpful, that comes to them at the end of the day, and maybe helps them think about what they have seen in the news, or what they're catching up at the end of the day, what they might be seeing in the news, and put it in a useful context for them. In many ways, I
Oh,
feel it's very similar to the kind of writing I've done separately. It's arriving in a different way.
can you give us a couple of examples?
Yeah, well, so I'm just before I was getting on here, I was finishing up today's edition. And I was thinking, I've actually just come back from vacation. I was looking at the news last night, and I was seeing, okay, I see the Supreme Court having a hearing where they may strike down, or substantially weaken the Voting Rights Act. I see a story about young members of the Young Republicans exchanging extremely racist text messages. I see stories about the Trump administration attempting to change the refugee program to basically bring in only white refugees, people from Europe or from South Africa. I see ICE producing, or the Border Patrol releasing a video with anti-Semitic slurs in it, and all of these things. It was a moment for me to step back, and just, I mean, be sort of taken aback by all of these things coming at once, but also to think about how all of these stories, which are in some ways not directly connected, um, really capture, I think, the zeitgeist of the moment, which is, a pushback on the idea of a diverse nation, an attempt to entrench white power in politics, or to re-entrench white power, to strengthen white power in politics. Um, and so I had sort of was putting these things together and thinking through that, and that's today's newsletter, which will be in people's inboxes. I don't know, maybe in an hour or so. I'm not quite sure yet.
Well, so you are looking at what is making headlines, or making stories, or things that have happened. There is no great they. People actually make decisions. Like, you're making a decision about what your attention has been drawn to, and you're investigating or elaborating on that. So none of us exist in isolation. It's always connection to something else. Who, for instance, are some of the sources, some of your resources? You mentioned Heather Cox Richardson. You didn't say that she's a resource for you, but who are some of the people your ear is tuned to? Are you there?
Um, I try to read extremely widely. Oh, yes, can you hear me? Let me go
We
through.
hear you. Yes, we hear you. We
Okay.
do hear you.
Um, I mean, I try to read as much as I can. Great. And that means, both, traditional news sources, a bunch of newsletters. I try to read partisan media on both sides. I watch a great deal of video throughout the day. I try to talk to people. It really depends on the story, but I do find that the more I read, the better off I am. And the more people I talk to, I think my schedule doesn't allow me to talk to as many people as always as I'd like, but I was working the last couple weeks I've been working on a magazine story, where I spent a week just following as many people as I could, and then spent the following week sort of trying to uh distill that down into 5,000 words or so. Um, but I have always found that um my approach is to just read and to consume as much as I can and synthesize that.
Okay. Do you find yourself, do you read people who you absolutely disagree with?
Absolutely. Yes. Um, there's only so much I can do, but I try to understand that. And I mean, an example of this would be, I'd say some of the stories that I have found most interesting are things that I have seen covered in conservative media and not in mainstream or liberal media. And I think those are helpful for understanding currents in politics that are not always appreciated by the kinds of people who read the Atlantic. So I try to kind of gravitate to the story and pick up on those things.
Okay, you use the word conservative and or conserving, and I was reading something recently. A writer made a distinction between the people who I'll just make a gross generalization and call them the MAGA people, and the Project 2025 people. This writer was saying these are not, they're not conserving anything, they're replacing everything. They're not real conservatives, in other words. They are people committed to replacing what we know as our government. So is the language changing also?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think in some ways I just sort of fell into a habit there by saying conservative media. I'd say some of the media I consume is what I would say conservative, and some of it is more, I would say, right wing. Um, but I think that is important. I think about this in the context of Project 2025, and I think I mentioned in the book. I don't. It is not a conservative undertaking. It is a radical undertaking. It is not trying to keep in place things or to keep things the way they were. It is trying to radically rework them. And I think we see that in a lot of places. I think that the Republican Party, the MAGA Republican Party, is anti-institutional. Um, it doesn't sort of match with the kind of Burkean conservatism. It doesn't even match with the kind of movement conservatism of William F. Buckley in the 60s and 70s. Um, and so I try, and as you can see, don't always succeed, to not call things conservative that are not conservative. And I think it's useful to call them right wing or to call them radical, as those labels fit better.
Okay, moving into this mandate, one of the things that as we were reading, it was, my God, all these alphabet agencies and departments and just, it's sort of like I did, for me personally, didn't really know much about my own government. There was a saying that Peter Coyne helped me with, that war is how Americans learn geography. He said that was attributed to Mark Twain. War is how Americans learn geography. I was thinking about it later, saying, to add on that, could it be in an undeclared or unending civil war, Americans are learning governance?
Absolutely.
That's right, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the reasons that Project 2025 is so daunting is that it does grasp so many parts of the government, and it talks about them. Even in the course of 900 pages, there are a lot of things that are skipped over or glossed over or abbreviated. Um, and I found it daunting. I have spent 15 years as a political reporter, as a generalist, where I have to I'm not a specialist in Congress or any particular thing. Um, and yet there was so much that I had to learn in the course of this. And there were times when I was calling up Pentagon budget analysts at think tanks and saying, hold on a second, you got to tell me what's going on here. Is this something that's totally normal, or is this something that's totally off the deep end? Help me figure that out. And I think that's one reason that some of this sort of slipped past people, because it is very hard to grasp and very hard to understand.
Well, Well, when the people who were creating this mandate, this document, I, did they ever consider, or did they intend that this would be made public? It seems they were exposing the blueprint. They were putting it right out there in public. Was that their goal?
I think that it was their goal, and it's an interesting question. I think that on the one hand, they were putting it out in the public in summer 2023 where it was visible. And they needed to do that, I think, because they wanted to really shape the Republican presidential primary. They wanted to ensure that whoever the Republican nominee was, whether it was Donald Trump or somebody else, was going to be shaped by those views and sort of have to try to adopt them. So they were trying to push things in a direction there. And the risk they were taking was that it would be made public. I think that one reason that was they're willing to take that risk was they saw the upside of shaping the primary, and they also realized that it was going to be very hard to read. It was 900 words and not written for a general audience. And in fact, I think that they were right. I think I would count myself as an example of this. I think I did not grasp how revolutionary it was and how complete and how important it was during the campaign. It was only after the election that I sat down to read it cover to cover and grasp that. So I think in that sense, they succeeded. And even now, I see Democratic Party officials who seem sometimes surprised by things happening in Project 2025, even though they've had 2 years and change to read it and know what's coming.
And so after you sat down with yourself and read it, did a light go on? What happened?
Yeah, I think so. When I looked at Project, I had read about Project 2025, I'd reported and written on it a little bit, and a lot of it would be me looking at the document and sort of poking into a particular, what is their policy on this thing? Which is a way that I've approached a lot of these documents in the past. And think tanks put out plans like this every 4 years, and they tend to be kind of a wish list with a bunch of policies they hope you can get. And I didn't grasp until I read this in its entirety. First of all, what a complete worldview it is. What an ideology. It's a goal to create a particular vision of society. And the second thing is I didn't recognize how complete a plan for implementing this was. As important as the policies were, the plan they had for creating a takeover of the government, for capturing the executive branch and giving the president more power. And it was, I think, easy to miss some of that if you got lost in what the particular policies were, which is what I did. And as we've seen, the kind of attack on the executive branch and on the federal government that Trump has mounted has been really sweeping and really powerful, and I think it has come as a surprise to many people.
Mhm. Now, in some point in 2019, shortly after he was elected, the current occupant of the White House was speaking to some reporters outside the UN, and he used the phrase that was quoted in Newsweek, "When I took over the United States." Now, the poet Maya Angelou says, when people tell you who they are, believe them the first time. Was he just saying, you haven't been in his mind, but that language, when I took over the United States, sounds like we're a hotel or a resort or steaks.
Yeah, I think Trump see the entire country much the way he sees business. He expects it to be a private company like the Trump Organization where he can do what he wants without a lot of oversight. Um, and I think that what happened in the first term was he had this idea, but he didn't understand how the government worked, and he didn't have people around him who understood how the government worked well either. Um, and that's a lot of the inspiration behind Project 2025 was a desire by these people who were his allies to make sure the government could work in the way he wanted um, to give him that power, to allow him to run it as a chief executive without a lot of checks and balances. Um, and I think that's the vision that they have been pushing, and they've been surprisingly successful in moving toward it.
But a government is not a business. It's certainly not a profit center. So parameters.
Yeah, I think this
Is
is
it something about us as Americans that we don't understand government enough ourselves, that we may not understand, be miseducated about what a government, what is the role of a government?
I think that's the big part of it. I mean, I think Trump is not educated about that. I think there is generally a sort of crisis of civics education. Um, but also, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, we have had a long and strong tradition, certainly not a flawless one, but a strong tradition of democracy in this country, including at times when the American people were not broadly as educated as we are now. So I don't know what to attribute to that. I mean, I don't know if it's a sense of a lot, a lack of national purpose to some extent after the Cold War. I don't know if it is um, uh, strong, consistent failures of government that have led people to simply lose faith in the system as it is. Um, but there does seem to be a misapprehension that exists with many people.
What are you hearing? What are you sensing? What are you intuiting as you're, uh, have been engaged in your book tour, and as your interviews in different media, and even talking to other news people, like somebody like Terry Gross, or the people you talk to at NPR? What are some of the things you guys are talking about that we don't hear about on the air?
Um, I think maybe this comes through some, but I think the atmosphere of gloom in the media is just very strong.
Let's say that again.
The atmosphere of gloom. I think there
Gloom.
is, we have had years of business struggles, and then to pile on top of that a government that is out to punish journalists, and a public that does not trust media institutions. I think there is a real fear that either the government could come for us, or else the businesses where we work will collapse. Um, and that sort of, that business collapse fear has been around for a very long time, since I've been in journalism. But I think the fear about what the government might do to come after us and to come after our employers is new and is very deeply felt.
Now, when you talk to real people, everyday, ordinary people, this same gloom that you just described?
Yeah, what I get from ordinary people often is they want they hope that I have something I can say to make it make sense, or to reassure them, or to confirm for them that things are as bad as they think. Um, and this is one of these cases where I think I can, I have the privilege and the responsibility of being able to spend a lot of time reading something like this and writing a book that can be helpful to people. But I don't think I know any better than most people where things are going, or what to do about it.
That's great, because often on MSNBC, which is what I listen to, there are people who can predict the future, like Sybil the soothsayer from the movie Network. If they're asked, what do you think is going to happen? And people invariably say something like, this is my experience. Well, I'm not sure, but then they go on to tell you what's going to happen. And if they know what's going to happen, it's like, why should we believe them? And why is there this pattern of us trying to predict, have anybody predict that's going to tell us what is going to be happening in the future, and skip over part of what's important in the here and now, in the present moment?
That's right. I mean, I think part of this is a problem of cable news, where there's a lot of time to fill, and only so much time to be reporting, and it's very easy to put people talking heads on who will yak about it, and that kills. And I have been one of those talking heads too. That eats up a lot of time in your 24 hours. I also think that I mean, on an individual level, when pundits make bad predictions, there is very seldom any kind of penalty for it.
Right.
Think of the last pundit you can recall who made a bad prediction and lost their job over it. I can think of lots of pundits who have lost jobs, but never for a bad prediction. And so on an individual basis, there's no accountability. But I do think in the long term, it undermines the trust in the press because people see us as people making bad predictions rather than as people bringing useful information to them.
Okay, one thing, if you had great power, you could just make anything happen, how would you reshape news? News, I'm using the term as best I can understand it. How would you reshape things? Magazines, newspapers, TV?
I think I would. Um, this is maybe even a strong. Is asking for more power than you've offered me here. I think what I would like to do is to educate to have better media literacy education uh, for people for everyone in the U.S. In my sense, and this gets to what I was saying earlier about reading so many different outlets. I think you can learn something helpful from almost anything you read or watch, as long as you know how to read or watch it critically, to think about what perspective it's coming from, to think about what they're leaving out, or what questions they're not asking, or how they're coming at it. Um, I think that's really helpful, and I think people would trust the media more if or they wouldn't have this sort of generalized "I do not trust the media," this overall picture, if they knew how to consume it critically. And I think if people learn to consume it critically, it doesn't matter what they're reading, what they're watching, where they're getting it. It matters how they're thinking about it.
So where is that missing? Consuming critically. Who's who, not to point fingers and say they're to blame, but how do we fill in that missing piece?
I think it's a
Consuming
tricky, yeah. I mean, I think it needs to happen in our schools. And it's not that in the
schools.
past it was much simpler when you had a local newspaper and you had the big four networks and you had your local news, and you had the Associated Press and you had the radio. But now there's so many things to choose from, and to sort of select from the buffet. And I think that's a lot. That's a much more complicated environment, and we're not preparing people for that environment. Partly because of what it came upon us so quickly. But I think that the negative effects of that are playing all around us. We need to start training people for a smartphone world that has existed now for many years.
Um, okay, I want to just get to some of the just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful parts of your book, which every page was. I mean, my book
Oh,
is
thank
all
you.
messed up because I left it in the car with the window down and it was raining. But on page 5, where you talk about Kevin Roberts, the president of Heritage, writes that Project 2025 has 4 goals: restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. Now, in working on this book, did you have a team of people helping you? You didn't do this all by yourself.
I did.
And what, how did you do such a magnificent job
Oh,
of taking this almost 1,000-page mandate uh, and reduce it, not reduce it, take this sprawling document, breaking it down and telling us what are the 4 main goals of it and who are the players also. Names most of us never heard about before: Russell Vaught and Paul Dans and so on and so forth. What was
well, thank you.
how did you do it?
That's so kind. I think in some ways, I've been preparing to write this for a very long time. I have, simply by covering politics and covering Trump very closely for a long time. I understood a lot of the bits and pieces, or I had the basis to sort of grab onto it. Um, and I had, read bits and pieces of Project 2025 before I embarked on the project also. Um, it was weird. I had to sort of figure out how to build the plane while I was flying it, as the expression goes, and I had a short time to put it together. And so I started by just reading it through and starting to create documents where I put the ideas on particular topics, and I started to think about, okay, how do they group together? Because there are ideas across many chapters on various departments that connect, but they don't connect in the way it's written. Someone has to put those together. And I started to see these big themes and try to group them, to collate the material. And then the other thing that I was trying to do was trying to understand these people behind it. So you mentioned Kevin Roberts, who is the head of the Heritage Foundation and kind of the person who brought this all together. And then there's Paul Dans, who organized it. And Dans is somebody who I didn't know very much about, and I think remains not that well known. He was a bit player in the first Trump administration. He got appointed to this strange job running Project 2025, brought together all these people, and really, you know, I think changed American politics, and now has again more or less disappeared from the scene. He's running for Senate in South Carolina. I don't expect he'll do well. Um, and so I wanted to understand who he was and where he had come from and how he came to these views, because he's somebody who, by his own account, grew up in a sort of Kennedy Democratic household. His parents worked for the government, and at some point he became much more conservative and became also uh, very very angry at other parts of the Republican Party that were not the Trump party. And then the third person is someone who I knew a little bit more about, and that's Russell Vogt. And I knew about him because he'd been the head of the Office of Management and Budget in the first Trump administration. And as I write in the book, OMB is not a sexy office. It's a place where the people who run OMB tend to be very skilled bureaucrats who know the government really well, but not strong ideologues. And he's somebody who is a very skilled bureaucrat. He knows the government well. He spent a lot of time thinking about it, but also has an extremely strong worldview. And he also came out of the first Trump administration, I think, with a kind of with an axe to grind. And so I wanted to understand sort of how that had happened and how he had gone from being, a conservative budget wonk in this truly conservative sense of small government, cutting spending, reducing the role of the president, to somebody who was, I think, the intellectual force behind this great grab of power. Somebody supporting, a devout evangelical Christian who was supporting a philandering, twice divorced president, a once social conservative who had, as budget chief, overseen a massive increase in the federal deficit. And so trying to understand, I'm not sure I totally understand, but I'm trying to understand how that had happened and how he tried to square these things. I wanted to get that. And so I spent a lot of time reading things he had written and watching interviews with him, and trying to understand his point of view as well.
Well, and here's something again that your writing and your articulating is just so incredible. On page 21, this is what you're saying about Russell Vogt. You say that when Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, asked him to lead Project 2025, he being Russell Vogt, he was ready. And you describe Vogt in these 3 paragraphs, is a consummate Washington insider who worked his way up through the ranks of Republican politics with the methodical approach one would expect from a budget wonk. Vogt grew up in what he's called a blue-collar family in Connecticut that was devoutly Christian. He attended Wheaton College, a conservative Christian liberal arts school in Illinois, whose most famous alumnus is Billy Graham. He later attended law school at George Washington University. Vogt broke into politics working for Senator Phil Gramm of Texas. Blah, 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 blah. Later, he worked for Representative Mike Pence, a fellow fiscal conservative and evangelical Christian, and at the Heritage Foundation. Here, with a bald pate, neat beard, and chunky glasses, Vogt has a mild mien that belies a radical worldview. Christianity has been the central theme of his life and career, shaping his approach even to budgeting. I mean, you got those little details in, so we could even get a sense of how he looks. So you seem really gifted at being able to identify people, and there's so many people who contributed to this. At least I read somewhere that maybe it was 114 different people contributing to the Project 2025.
That's right.
And that I read somewhere else that three major power centers all tied closely to J.D. Vance. Trump, Peter Thiel, and vote. But Peter Thiel is identified as the person who actually made J.D. Vance, brought him into the tech bro community, financed his Senate race in Ohio, and was all about him becoming the vice president. What about J.D. Vance?
Well, Vance is an interesting character because I think he does he connects to so many of these things. And if you were imagining a presidential candidate who fit what Project 2025 wants to do, Vance is a much better fit than Trump. He is, I mean, they're very intellectual in their approach, and Vance is an intellectual, has an intellectual approach to things. They're very rooted in Christianity. They're deeply Christian in their worldview, and it's a very conservative, fundamentalist approach to Christianity. But Vance shares that, and we see he's sort of, couches many things in his Catholicism, and argues with the Pope, for example. Um, and he's also he has this idea about, he supports the idea of pronatalism, of people having more babies. That's an idea that comes from his approach to the world much more than Trump's. Um, I think he is the person who embodies the values of Project 2025 most. What Trump provides for Project 2025 is a vessel. Um, he is a person who is willing to tear up the federal government as we know it, to fire civil servants, to grab power for the president, but also able to do that. Uh, when any other president who tried to do this, I think, would have failed. I think that he would have been stopped by Congress, and Congress would have objected. But Trump has members of Congress terrified of primary challenges, and he has the kind of populist support that is necessary for this. JD Vance doesn't have Trump's charisma. He doesn't have the same kind of touch, and so Trump can get things done that nobody else could. But Vance, I think, is the embodiment of the Project 2025 worldview in politics.
But David, you say he was willing and he was able. Have we ever, no, I won't even ask it this way. Is it an ability to call people names, to call them just names that you just would not use in around other people, to demean people? How can that be charismatic?
I think there's a couple things that work for him. One of them is a lack of shame. He simply is not ashamed of anything. And so the kind of constraints of propriety or traditional guardrails, or simply wanting to be a normal person that have held back other presidents, don't hold him back. He's simply willing to do those things he wouldn't otherwise. I think where his charisma comes in is he has, we live in a country where, because of gerrymandering, almost every seat in Congress is a safe seat. The numbers vary from election to election, but we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 dozen seats that are truly contested. All the other seats, either a Republican or a Democrat will win. The question is who that is. And that means that the primary is the real race. And when the primary is the real race, the most devoted, loudest activists have a lot of control. And those people love Trump. And so his ability to credibly threaten Republican office holders with a primary, I think, means that we have not seen Congress stepping in to stop him on things even that they might oppose or that might be against their interests. And it doesn't matter that Trump is, I think it's fair to say Trump is fairly unpopular. His approval ratings are bad. He's consistently lost elections. Really, only 2024, it's the only election he was able to win majority of the popular vote in, or plurality of the top popular vote. But it doesn't matter, because he has this devoted base, and they sort of maintain power for him. The third thing is courts, and I think that's a bit of a mystery why the courts have, and especially the Supreme Court, have been less willing to step in. But I think one answer is that they are politicians too. and they're responding to political incentives. And you see the MAGA movement sort of sweeping through the American right, including in federal courts.
Well, we in Easton, a group of us, have tried to understand something about the language, like politics. What is politics, or what are politics? And politicians, uh, can you say what politics is?
No, not anymore. I mean, there's a quote attributed, I believe it came from the late Andrew Breitbart, who founded that site that later Steve Bannon took over. And what Breitbart said was that politics is downstream from culture. And I think what he meant by that was, if you can control institutions of culture, then you can affect the politics. And we've seen that mentality working very well for the American right. I mean, you see them seeking to grab power or to bully into submission Disney, CBS, all of these major companies, major law firms, universities. And I think what they understand is that if you can control the culture in that way, then politics will follow. And they have been very effective at that. But it also expands what is politics. I mean, things that um, would have seemed well outside the realm of politics, or well outside the appropriate role of government, are suddenly things that the administration is doing, and sometimes things that the Supreme Court is allowing it to do, or the Congress is allowing it to do. So I have a hard time grasping at this point what is and isn't politics.
Well, I want to go to language also. In journalism, we have, my experiences, much conversation about being objective. My standpoint, there is no such thing as objectivity. We all come from someplace, and the whole notion that there's something evil or wrong about diversity. Nature is diverse, people are diverse in the same family. So how is it that we can be, in my opinion, sold a bill of goods that diversity is harmful?
I think that's the right question. I think that one way that Trump has succeeded is by grabbing. There's a couple things I would say. One is Trump has made the most of a small political mandate. He has used his win in 2024 to claim that this shows the American people are against diversity in many guises, and that they want all these things gotten rid of. I don't think that's necessarily true, but he's willing to say that. So I think that's one important part of it. I also think that I don't know. I mean, it is a tough question to explain. In some ways we can look at this as simply a resurgence of long running, racial hierarchies in American culture, of entrenched racism sort of having, the pendulum swinging back, or entrenched racism taking power that it's always had. I guess I'm not convinced that the American people buy this, but I think it is very true that that is the policy of the government, and they're being very open about it.
Whatever happened to Elon Musk?
Still here.
Great question. I think Musk flew too close to the sun. He thought he had more power than he did, and we've seen this with a lot of people around Trump. Steve Bannon's a good example. He starts to feel that they're too big for their britches, and he gets rid of them. And in the meantime, I think he did a lot of the dirty work of Project 2025 by firing many people, closing offices, attempting to close departments. Those became a sort of bulldozer for Project 2025. And then he took a lot of the heat that otherwise Trump and Russell Butt might have taken. And then they discarded him when they were done with him.
Well, I'm told we have less than 5 minutes. Any burning questions out there, you all? Quick. Beat. Okay.
That was amazing, David. Thank you. I'm curious your thoughts on what's just happened at the Pentagon / aka Department of War with all the journalists cleaning out their offices. I mean, on the face, not a good sign. But as a seasoned journalist, writer, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
And it's, the first thing that comes to mind is just that it's remarkably naked. Um, they're being so blunt about what they're doing. They don't want people reporting on what's going on. And they're willing to do that openly. Look, every government hates negative reporting. And every government has a different approach to how they fight that. But none of them has been this blunt and open about it. And I think it's a bad sign that they're willing to be that open. Um, I do think that we will continue to see really strong reporting on the Pentagon. I read someone saying today, basically, if you tell journalists not to look at something, they're going to be especially eager to look at it. And people who cover the Pentagon are some of the fiercest journalists out there. People who do that well know so many people in so many parts of the defense establishment, and they are going to find information out. And there are a lot of people who are upset about what's going on in the Defense Department, and they are going to find that out too. So I think in some ways, I'm less worried about the specific information that we're going to miss out on than I am about the willingness of the administration to do this and what that portends for the future and for attempts to crack down on what Americans can know about what their government is doing.
All right, David, I'm going to close with this question. With so much on your plate and all that you are looking at, reading, listening to, and it's every day, every day, every day, do you have practices or a practice that supports you in just trying to stay sane?
I don't know if I am
Run,
staying sane.
swim, sing? You do music though, right?
I play music. I keep a guitar at reach at my desk so I can pick it up at any time. I try to meditate every day. I try to keep the job as close to, I'm from Akron, Ohio, good union town, and I try to,
Where are
yeah.
you from?
I'm sorry.
Melba hometown.
That's my hometown.
No kidding. You've got to be kidding me.
Read the read a dove.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, yeah. I was gonna say I try to think of things as I sort of, it's a blue collar job. I try to work from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, and then try to be off when I'm off. But I think it's hard to stay sane. It's hard for anyone to stay sane in this moment. It's a scary time.
Did you say Akron?
Yes, ma'am.
And Robin Roberts' mother was from Akron too.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and her mother's maiden name was Tolliver.
Oh wow.
Chance, choice, change, and connection. All right. We got it.
Right, thank you, everybody,
you.
for.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for graciously asking me to talk. I hope it's been helpful.
Melba Tolliver interviewing David Graham, and thank you so much, and thanks to Lafayette College.
Yes, thank you,
for
Lafayette.
hosting this
Thank you.
program. And we'll see you at the next Easton Book Festival program, and buy this book.
Oh, buy it.
We
You-
read
you-
this book
you should.
aloud to each other in Easton, and it's a.
We didn't ask, what's your next book?
Oh, well.
You sound like my agent. I gotta figure that out.
Thank
Okay,
you.
guys.
Thanks, David. Thank you all. Thank you. Can you believe that?
Sorry that,
From Akron?